February 20th, 1945, northern Iwo. Japanese soldiers watched the horizon, squinting through volcanic ash as unfamiliar American tanks rolled closer. Something was off. Thick, black smoke billowed from the tanks, but not from fire. These weren't damaged, just different. One tank's turret swung toward a bunker. Instead of a regular cannon, it had some kind of nozzle. Then a sharp, mechanical hissing, almost like a giant tire blowing out. The next second, a river of burning fuel shot out, racing across 150 yards of ash and swallowing a neighboring pillbox in a sheet of fire. The screams didn't last long. Panicked, defenders grabbed field phones, trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. 8 Shermans, each rigged with flamethrowers, something the Japanese had never faced before. Weapons that instantly changed the rules of the fight. In the Pacific's most savage battle, what Yamada and his comrades couldn't have known, was that these machines were the result of months of secrecy and late-night work at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. Navy Seabees stripped and rebuilt the tanks around the clock, marrying American industry with the desperate demands of the battlefield. One Marine Battalion commander later called them the single best weapon of the entire operation. It was only the second day of the battle for Iwo, and everything was about to change. These 8 tanks alone would end up causing over 30% of Japanese casualties burned alive. That number would haunt anyone who survived on either side for decades. The Imperial Japanese Army had spent a year turning Iwo into a fortress. 8 square miles of volcanic rock became a nightmare maze that broke every rule in the military playbook. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi took over the island's defense in June 1944. He knew with brutal honesty that he couldn't beat the Americans. That wasn't his job. His orders: make Iwo so costly that the U.S. might think twice about invading Japan itself. Kuribayashi studied what went wrong at Saipan, Peleliu, the Philippines. The old ways, charging the enemy, banzai attacks, fighting to the last man in the open, were suicide against American firepower. He made a radical call. No more glorious charges, no more dying for honor in the sunlight. His 21,000 men would fight underground, turning Iwo into a hidden slaughterhouse. By February 1945, Japanese engineers had dug 11 miles of tunnels with plans for 17. Some reached down 7 stories into the rock. They carved out 5,000 caves and chambers, some big enough for 300 or 400 men. The island bristled with 1,500 fortified positions, concrete bunkers 4 feet thick, reinforced with steel rods scavenged from abandoned projects perched on every high point. Each was placed for maximum overlapping fields of fire. Japanese guns hidden behind steel doors that only opened to shoot covered every inch of ground. The tunnel system was an underground city. Air came through hidden vents disguised as rocks. Hospitals buried deep could treat 400 wounded at a time. Communication centers sat 75 feet below the surface, connecting the defenses with miles of wire. Stores of rice, water, and ammo could outlast a 2-month siege. Under Hill 382, the biggest chamber stretched 50 meters by 20, big enough to shelter a whole battalion. Kuribayashi set up his defense like a chess game. The south, around Mount Suribachi, was its own command under Colonel Kanehiko Atsuchi, 2,000 men, with artillery aimed at the beaches. Up north, where the ground favored defenders, Kuribayashi kept 15,000 troops under his direct control. In the middle, a reserve force of 4,000 could rush anywhere. Trouble broke out, moving unseen through the tunnels. The Americans knew Iwo would be tough. Intelligence said the defenses were solid, but nobody really grasped the scale of Kuribayashi's underground fortress. For 74 straight days, Bombers dropped 6,800 tons of explosives on the island. The Navy fired 22,000 shells at Japanese positions. American commanders figured that would break the defenders. They thought they'd take the island in 5 days. They couldn't have been more wrong. The bombardment barely made a dent. Less than 200 out of 1,500 Japanese strongpoints were destroyed. Their tunnels? Still there, untouched. Most of the defenders hadn't even felt the shock. 5 months before the invasion, over at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, Colonel George F. Unmack was already working on a solution. He'd spent 44 years in uniform and now ran the Army's Chemical Warfare Service's most secret project in the Central Pacific, known as CNPAC. His job was simple on paper: build a weapon that could finally root the Japanese out of their caves and bunkers, places where regular bombs and shells didn't work. Unmack started small, just the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company, but he knew he needed more. So he pulled 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, the Seabees, famous across the Pacific for fixing, building, and inventing anything you could imagine. He added Marines from the 5th Tank Battalion and Army mechanics from the 81st Ordnance Company. Suddenly, he had a team that cut across the services, all focused on one goal: make a weapon that could burn the enemy out. 2 Seabees, machinist's mate A. Riker and electrician's mate Joseph Kell, led the technical side. You'll never see their names in the big history books, but their work saved countless lives. Both had seen what happened when Marines tried to storm those bunkers. Artillery just didn't cut it. The problem wasn't a lack of firepower. It was about delivering it where it mattered, inside those underground defenses. They had their work cut out for them. Earlier attempts to strap flamethrowers onto tanks were half measures, just handheld units bolted to the armor. The Canadian Ronsons the Marines brought over worked, but only at short range, and the fuel ran out in half a minute. Maintenance was a nightmare. Nearly half broke down during a fight. Their first real success came with the M3 light tank, nicknamed Satan. The first of these, called Hells of Fire, showed the idea could work, but it wasn't enough. The turret could only swing halfway around. The flame gun couldn't point up or down much. Worse, the thin armor turned the tank into an easy target for Japanese anti-tank guns. Unmack's team needed something better. Unmack reported straight up the chain, all the way to Admiral Nimitz's staff. They found 8 Sherman M4A3 medium tanks for the conversion. These beasts weighed 35 tons, ran on a 500 horsepower engine, and had armor thick enough to shrug off most Japanese guns. The Shermans had already proven themselves in Europe. Now it was time to see what they could do in the Pacific. But getting the tanks was only the start. The real leap came when Riker and Kell began mixing the best parts of 3 different flamethrowers: the British Ronson, the Navy Mark I, and even some captured German tech from North Africa. They worked around the clock in the Hawaiian heat, grabbing a few hours of sleep on the floor next to their gear. Piece by piece, they built something new. Their creation, the CBH-1 Construction Battalion Hawaii 1, changed the game. Each tank needed 150 pounds of welding rod and more than 1,000 electrical connections. Every conversion took 1,100 man-hours and 150 custom-made parts. All told, it cost about $20,000 to $25,000 per tank, about $360,000 today. The specs were wild. The CBH-1 ran at 3 times the pressure of earlier designs, shooting fire up to 150 yards, almost triple the old range. The new fuel mix, a blend of diesel, gasoline, and napalm, burned at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The tanks could pour out fire for up to 80 seconds, though the manual said to use short bursts to save fuel and keep things accurate. Most important, the flamethrower now took the place of the tank's main gun so it could swing almost all the way around and angle up or down, giving the crew real control for the first time. The gunner could aim the flamethrower just as precisely as a regular cannon, using the same periscope and controls. That made life a lot easier for the crews, no need for a bunch of extra training to master the new weapon. Still, the real game changer was psychological. The Marines painted these modified tanks in the usual olive drab. No special markings, nothing to give away what they could do. To the Japanese, they looked like ordinary Shermans right up until the moment they spat fire. By then, it was already too late. The fuel system was a piece of genius engineering. The tanks carried 290 gallons of thickened fuel, plus an extra 10 gallons of regular fuel to ignite it. A separate pressure tank, filled with compressed nitrogen instead of air, meant the whole thing was less likely to blow if hit. Nitrogen doesn't feed a fire. Safety features everywhere. The designers knew what happened to earlier flamethrower vehicles, and they worked hard to avoid those disasters. Down below Hill 382, General Kuribayashi worked out his defense like a math problem. Kill zones overlapped at exact angles. Hidden artillery spotters could call in fire on any spot within seconds. Machine guns covered each other, funneling American troops right into pre-planned artillery strikes. His rules were clear: save ammo, stay underground, make the Americans come to you. His orders to every commander spelled it out: don't die until you've killed 10 Americans. No big counterattacks. Every man stayed put until he was overrun, then fought on with grenades, bayonets, fists if it came to that. In theory, 21,000 defenders could take out 210,000 attackers, more than the entire American force. Japanese defensive tactics had come a long way since the early days of the Pacific War. Intel from Saipan and Peleliu had driven the point home. Flamethrower operators stood out. Black smoke from burning diesel gave away their position, and since the weapon's range wasn't great, operators had to get dangerously close. Losses were brutal. Some units lost more than 70% of their flamethrower men. A few saw 92% wiped out. The Japanese trained for this. Machine gunners were told to concentrate on anyone with those twin tanks. Snipers got extra ammo just for picking off flame operators. Infantry drilled on, rushing these positions with bayonets, knowing the flamethrower's nozzle couldn't aim low enough up close. But all this planning assumed the flamethrowers would be carried by infantry. The idea of tanks, armored, protected, crawling right up to the bunkers and spraying fire from a distance, just wasn't on their radar. Japanese positions, built to stand up to bombs and shells, had no special defenses against burning fuel seeping through cracks and vents. This gap was fatal. The same bunkers that had saved them before now became ovens. On February 19th, D-Day at Iwo Jima, 8 M4A3 flamethrower tanks rolled ashore, mixed in with the regular Shermans of the 4th and 5th Tank Battalions. The official name was M4A3R5, but paperwork used other labels too: POA CWS H1, CB MK1. They landed in the 5th wave around 10 a.m. after the beaches were barely under control. The Navy wanted them held back. Marine commanders agreed, wanting to see how things unfolded before risking these rare machines. 4 tanks went to the 4th Marine Division, 4 to the 5th. Each had a number, 431 through 438. A few crews painted nicknames: Hellfire, Corkscrew Blaze of Glory. Most tanks stayed plain, their real power hidden until it counted. For the first day, these flamethrower tanks just sat near the sand, idle while Marines died by the hundreds trying to root out hidden Japanese gun positions. The volcanic ash was brutal. It swallowed a man's ankles with every step, making the slog forward almost impossible. Standard tactics crashed and burned. Even naval shells couldn't reach bunkers buried under 10 feet of ash and concrete. Artillery shells slammed into the Marine lines and did nothing. These guys had dug in so deep, even 16-inch naval guns couldn't crack their defenses. Marine riflemen went up against bunkers that felt less like enemy positions and more like cliffs made of concrete. By the end of the first day, the casualty numbers were brutal. 2,420 Marines killed or wounded. The beach itself turned into a nightmare with Japanese artillery, hidden until now, tearing into the packed landing forces. Sherman tanks tried to push inland but got stuck in the ash or picked off by anti-tank guns, hidden in the chaos. By nightfall, the Marines had barely made it 700 yards off the beach, nowhere close to the day's goal of seizing the airfield. The next morning, February 20th, things looked grim. The 21st Marine Regiment was pinned down, trying and failing to cross Motoyama Airfield Number 1. 3 concrete pillboxes sat in front of them, their machine guns locking down a 200-yard stretch of death. 2 rifle companies had already been chewed up, trying to rush them. In less than 2 days, the regiment lost more than a third of its men. Lieutenant Colonel William Duplantis, leading the 3rd Battalion, knew something had to give. He called in the flamethrower tanks. At 2:20 p.m., the first M4A3 flamethrower tank rolled out, tank number 431, with Staff Sergeant Robert Meza at the helm. Meza wasn't new to this. He'd fought on Saipan and Tinian. He moved up on the Japanese strongpoints at an angle, hiding behind the wrecks of Japanese planes. To the enemy, it just looked like another Sherman trying to make a run for it. Meza kept it slow. He knew surprise was all they had left. Inside the tank, the crew got ready. Private First Class James Morrison drove, fighting the thick ash that threatened to trap the 35-ton beast. Private Robert Chen, up front, kept his eyes peeled for enemy infantry and manned the bow machine gun. Corporal Anthony Vitelli checked the fuel pressure, 300 psi just right. Corporal Thomas Carlson, the gunner, searched for the nearest pillbox through his periscope. When they got to within 125 yards, Meza gave the order. "Gunner, flamethrower, pillbox, fire!" The CBH-1 flamethrower roared to life, sounding like hell itself. A stream of burning napalm shot out, hammering through the pillbox's gun port and pouring inside. Instantly, the inside was an inferno. Temperatures shot up past 1,100 degrees in seconds. The air burned away so fast the defenders choked before the flames even touched them. Anyone who made it out the back was cut down by Marines waiting for just that. Meza swung the turret 30 degrees and hit the next pillbox. This time, the Japanese were ready. A 47mm anti-tank gun fired point blank. The shell hit the Sherman's front and bounced off, harmless. Carlson unleashed another blast, holding the trigger for 15 seconds. Black smoke poured out of the enemy bunker. The 3rd pillbox was trickier, tucked behind rocks, where the tank couldn't get a clear shot. Meza told Morrison to push forward, right into danger, just 80 yards from Japanese lines. As they crested a rise, Japanese soldiers popped up from hidden holes, charging with satchel charges and magnetic mines. Chen fired the 30-caliber machine gun, but a few attackers reached the tank's blind spot. That's when the CBH-1's upgrades showed their worth. Unlike regular flamethrower tanks stuck firing only forward, the CBH-1's turret could spin all the way around. Carlson swung it 180 degrees and let loose a wall of fire behind them. The Japanese infantry vanished in the flames, with the last pillbox gone. The 21st Marines finally broke through, advancing 400 yards in just 2 hours, more than they'd managed in the previous 2 days. News traveled fast up and down the lines. The flamethrower tanks worked. and they didn't die like regular Shermans. Within 6 hours, all 8 flamethrower tanks were in the fight. Everything shifted. The 23rd Marines, backed by tank number 434 near the East Boat Basin, wiped out 4 enemy bunkers in one afternoon. The tide had turned. The crew came up with a move they called corkscrew and burn. Instead of charging straight in, they'd spiral toward their target, dodging anti-tank fire and blasting flames non-stop. The effect wasn't just physical. Psychologically, it shattered the enemy. Japanese soldiers, trained to fight to the last man, started running the moment they spotted flame tanks. They ditched bunkers they were supposed to defend to the death because the thought of getting torched was just too much. Tank 437, working with the 24th Marines, was the first to try out what they called breach and clear. The tank would douse a position with fire, clearing out any defenders. Then Marine engineers would sprint in with demolition charges and blow the fortification for good. Suddenly, positions that had held out for days fell in minutes. One afternoon, this combo wiped out 7 bunkers that had stalled an entire battalion. But the real shock came from Tank 432. Near the base of Mount Suribachi, Tank 432 rolled up to a web of caves supporting the 26th Marines. Sergeant William Patterson, the commander, told his driver to halt about 100 yards from the cave mouths. He peered through the periscope and saw Japanese soldiers lurking in the dark. Instead of blasting away, Patterson fired a short burst of flame into the air, just a warning. The reaction was instant and wild. Japanese troops scrambled out the back exits, abandoning their orders and their posts. The Marines were so stunned, they barely fired at the fleeing enemy. In half an hour, an entire defensive sector just crumbled, and the tank hadn't even fired at a target. This was the first time Japanese forces ditched their positions en masse. By nightfall on February 20th, everything had changed. Marines started pausing their attacks until flame tanks could get up front. Infantry learned to stick about 50 yards behind the tanks, close enough to rush in after the shock, but far enough not to get singed by the heat, which could burn your eyebrows off from 30 yards away. Artillery spotters even shifted tactics, picking out targets for the flame tanks instead of regular bombardment. The numbers from that first day were eye-opening. 47 enemy positions destroyed. Marine casualties down 40% in the areas where flame tanks led the way, and 600 yards gained in sectors that had been stuck for 2 days. But the biggest change was psychological. Now, instead of fighting to the death, Japanese soldiers were running. The Japanese command tried to react fast, but it didn't really work. General Kuribayashi ordered every available 47 impenetrable gun to focus on the flame tanks, and special assault teams, guys willing to strap on explosives, were thrown together. Infantry got orders to aim for the tanks' vision slits, desperate to blind the crews. But the Americans had a trick up their sleeve. The flame tanks looked just like regular Shermans until they fired. Japanese gunners couldn't tell which tank was which until it was already too late. And when they focused on the flame tanks, the regular ones laid down covering fire. That split-second surprise gave the Americans the edge. Then came February 23rd, D+4, the same day the flag went up on Suribachi. The flamethrower tanks faced their toughest fight yet. The 3rd Marine Division set out to take Hill 382, the second highest point on Iwo Jima, and the heart of Kuribayashi's northern defenses. The hill was a nightmare, riddled with bunkers and tunnels stacked 7 stories deep. Japanese gunners had every approach dialed in for artillery and mortars. They'd built multiple defensive lines with overlapping fields of fire and underground passages so defenders could pop up behind the attackers. Every earlier assault had ended in disaster, with more than half the attackers wiped out. The 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, had lost 70% of its strength just trying to get near the hill. At 8 a.m., 4 flame tanks rolled out in echelon formation backed by 6 regular Shermans and a full battalion of infantry. This time, though, the Japanese were waiting. They'd set up hidden 75mm mountain guns, much bigger than the usual anti-tank weapons, specifically to take out the flame tanks. As the lead flame tank crested the first rise, 3 concealed guns opened up. The first shell smashed into Tank 433's track, stopping it cold. The crew kept that flamethrower going, holding their ground while a wall of fire blocked anyone behind them from seeing a thing and kept the Japanese heads down. It was pure guts, and it gave the rest of the tanks room to move up. Tank 431 pushed forward, right through the smoke and into artillery fire that would have shredded any infantry. Shell fragments hammered the armor like hailstones. Inside, Private First Class Morrison drove blind, peering through a tiny periscope. He said later he could barely make out anything more than 10 feet in front of him. When Tank 434 got within 60 yards of the main Japanese bunker, its flamethrower let loose. But the Japanese weren't caught off guard this time. They'd covered the bunker openings with thick steel plates they could slam shut between bursts of machine gun fire. The flames just hit steel and dripped away. It looked like the flame tanks had finally met their match. But Corporal Michael Rodriguez spotted something. After a long blast, the steel plates started glowing cherry red. He figured if the metal got hot enough, it'd bend and open up cracks. Ignoring the rules, Rodriguez kept the fire going for 45 seconds, dangerously long, burning through precious fuel. Finally, the plate warped. Fire and fuel spilled through the gaps. Suddenly, the bunker turned into an oven. Ammo inside started exploding, popping off in wild chains. Concrete shattered from the heat. The explosions even blew open tunnel entrances the Japanese had tried to hide. Marines rushed in with satchel charges, tossing explosives into every opening before the defenders could regroup. In 3 hours, Hill 382's outer defenses gave way. The impregnable position was crumbling, but the fight showed the flame tanks weren't all powerful. Tank 431 ran dry after just 80 seconds of steady flame. Refueling meant pulling back to special trucks, a process that took at least 2 hours. During that lull, the Japanese could patch up defenses or bring in fresh troops. The tanks packed a punch, but they couldn't keep it up forever. That same day, something else stood out. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams proved portable flamethrowers still mattered. The tanks couldn't squeeze through a narrow ravine called the amphitheater, so Williams went in on foot, hauling a 70-pound M22 flamethrower. 4 riflemen covered him. 2 would die protecting him. In 4 hours, Williams single-handedly torched 7 pillboxes the tanks couldn't reach. His methods fit perfectly with the tanks. Where steel machines stalled, guts and grit kept the attack rolling. Williams's courage earned him the Medal of Honor. He'd lived to be the last surviving World War II Medal of Honor recipient, passing away in June 2022 at 98. His citation summed it up. He volunteered when tanks couldn't break through, braving mines, machine guns, and black volcanic sand. Williams went forward alone to silence those deadly positions. The numbers from that first week told their own story. Where flamethrower tanks fought, Marine casualties dropped by 40% compared to regular assaults. Japanese strongpoints that had held out for days fell in hours. Just 8 tanks burned through 70,000 gallons of fuel in 7 days, destroying around 300 enemy positions. They needed 10,000 gallons a day, so the Marines had to set up special depots close to the front. By early March, the battle shifted north to Iwo Jima's plateau, a nightmare of sulfur pits, jagged ravines, and volcanic rock. Tanks could barely move. General Kuribayashi set his last line of defense here, counting on the hellish ground to slow the Americans. Marines called it the meat grinder. 850 casualties for one hill. And tanks tried to cross sharp volcanic rocks and got stuck on hidden obstacles under the ash. The flame tanks didn't quit. They turned into mobile fortresses, parking at key spots to back up the infantry. 5th Engineer Battalion Marines worked through the night, building ramps and clearing paths under sniper fire so the tanks could reach new positions. When they couldn't attack head-on, the crews aimed streams of fire off rocks to snake flames around corners or into hidden bunkers. Then, on March 8th, D+17, Tank 436 pulled off what the crews called the impossible shot, supporting the 9th Marines as they tried to crack Cushman's pocket, a tangle of caves and bunkers clinging to a near-vertical cliff. Sergeant Daniel Foster thought he might have a way in. He figured if they fired the tank's flamethrower at the highest angle possible, maybe the fire would arc up and drop right into the Japanese positions from above. The math was iffy. The CBH-1 flamethrower only elevated to 35 degrees, but the target sat at 40, so Foster had his driver crawl the tank up onto a pile of rubble, leftovers from naval shelling, which tipped the whole thing backward. The tank teetered there, mortars raining down, and Corporal Anthony Vitelli pulled the trigger. The shot looked impossible. A stream of burning napalm soared up, hung in the air for a heartbeat, then poured down over the cliff's edge and into the Japanese hideouts. It was brutal, not just physically, psychologically too. The defenders had believed they were safe up there, out of reach. That illusion burned away with everything else. Witnesses saw Japanese soldiers throwing themselves off the cliffs, choosing the fall over the flames. By March, these flamethrower tanks had become the backbone of the Marines' attack. Each one rolled out with its own support crew, regular tanks to keep anti-tank guns busy, infantry to guard against suicide attacks, engineers to clear obstacles, and ammo teams hauling up 300-gallon fuel trailers to keep the tanks burning. It wasn't just a new weapon, it was a whole new way to fight, and it started to shape Marine Corps tactics for years to come. Fuel alone was a nightmare. Electrician's mate second class Kissel, who had helped design the system, came to Iwo Jima to keep the tanks running. He said keeping all 8 in action meant setting up a supply line all the way back to Pearl Harbor. Fuel mixing stations never shut down, churning out batches of diesel, gasoline, and napalm powder in exact ratios. They had to use it within 72 hours. Any longer and the stuff separated, clogging the flame guns. The Japanese adapted fast. They put together tank killer squads, volunteers with explosives strapped to their bodies. Some of them got through. On March 11th, a Japanese soldier blew himself up against Tank 438, killing 3 of the 5 crew. But it didn't stop the Marines. For every tank knocked out, another rolled up from the beach. Mechanics patched up the damaged ones and sent them back out. General Kuribayashi watched the whole thing from his bunker beneath the northern plateau. In his last report to Imperial Headquarters, sent on March 17th, he admitted the truth. The enemy's special flame tanks have proven more effective than all their artillery and aerial bombardment combined. They achieve in minutes what conventional weapons cannot accomplish in days. We have no effective counter to this weapon. The Americans have not just superior numbers, but superior imagination. It built to a climax. In the last week of March, Marines closed in on the gorge, Kuribayashi's final stronghold, a tangled mess of ravines and caves they called the Bloody Gorge. Here, less than 700 yards square, the last 3,000 Japanese defenders prepared for their final stand. March 21st, D+30, every working flamethrower tank, 6 out of the original 8, with 2 still in the shop, gathered for a full-scale assault. 4 more flame tanks rushed in from Hawaii, joined them. These new arrivals used the less powerful Ronson system with a much shorter range, but it didn't matter. This was the biggest flamethrower attack of the Pacific War. Tank 431, still showing fresh scars from its last fight, led the way. Welded patches, battered armor, scorch marks. It looked like a survivor. Tank 433, limping along on a patched track that clanked with every turn, took the left. 434, 436, and 437 formed the center. 432 covered the right. At 10 a.m., they rolled out in a crescent, jets of fire, overlapping so the defenders had nowhere to hide. Marines followed, lobbing white phosphorus grenades into cave mouths to mark targets. Engineers finished the job, sealing up positions with demolition charges once the flames had done their work. The Japanese fought back, fiercely as ever, but it wasn't enough. The end was coming. Suicide squads burst from hidden spider holes, but they never made it far. Flames caught them before they even got close. Anti-tank gunners fired straight at the enemy, refusing to stop shooting even as their own positions went up in fire. One moment sticks out. A Japanese officer marched out of a bunker, samurai sword in hand, and went straight for tank 434. The tank's bow gunner just froze, maybe out of shock, maybe out of some strange respect. He didn't shoot. Instead, Marine riflemen dropped the officer only a few yards from the tank. Later, someone sent that sword back to Marine headquarters, a grim trophy, but also a nod to the kind of courage they were up against. By sunset on March 21st, the Marines broke through the gorge. More than 800 Japanese defenders lay dead, many burned so badly you couldn't recognize them. Flamethrower tanks tore through 8,000 gallons of fuel mix that day alone, a record for the whole campaign. Marines lost 92 killed and 257 wounded, which was bad, but nowhere near as bad as it could have been with a normal assault. Still, the price was steep. People started to see it on both sides. Tank crews were a mess. The violence stuck to them. Corporal Carlson from Tank 431 talked about the screams, short but unforgettable. He said, "You could hear them screaming when the flame hit. Not for long, but you heard it sometimes at night. I still hear it. We did what we had to do, but I'll never forget the smell. Burning flesh mixed with sulfur from the volcanic rock." Maintenance teams found bits of human remains fused to the tank tracks. It took blowtorches to clean them off. The tanks themselves were falling apart, transmissions dying from the volcanic ash, fuel lines clogged up with carbon from the napalm, track pins snapping under the extra armor they'd welded on just to survive. By the end of March, the only way to keep even 4 tanks running was to strip parts from wrecked ones. On March 26, 1945, they finally declared Iwo Jima secure. What was supposed to take 5 days had dragged out for 36. American casualties hit 26,038, with 6,121 dead, numbers that stunned everyone back home and in command. Japanese losses were almost total. Out of about 21,000 defenders, only 216 surrendered. The rest either fought to the end or killed themselves, sometimes to avoid the flames. Flamethrower tanks changed everything. After the battle, analysts said these tanks saved roughly 5,000 American lives. They knocked out over 1,000 enemy bunkers, burned through 360,000 gallons of fuel, and basically rewrote the Marine Corps' playbook for assaults. Maybe the biggest thing, they shattered the myth that Japanese defenders couldn't be rooted out. Captain Frank Caldwell, who led Company F, 26th Marines, put it simply, it was the flame tank, more than any other supporting arm, that won this battle. Artillery, naval guns, airstrikes, none of those could dig the Japanese out of their underground fortresses. The flamethrower tanks got it done. The stats paint the picture. Over 30% of Japanese casualties on Iwo Jima came from flamethrowers, whether tank-mounted or handheld. In the areas where flame tanks led the way, Marines advanced 3 times faster than without them. Those 216 Japanese prisoners, more than the total taken at Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu combined. Lots of them said flat out, they surrendered because they were terrified of burning to death. The ripple effect spread fast. The Marine Corps put in an urgent request for 54 more flamethrower tanks. Colonel Unum's team at Schofield Barracks scrambled to ramp up production, giving it the same high priority as the B-29 bomber and the Manhattan Project. They rolled out an improved model, the CBH-2, with better range and reliability. By June 1945, 70 new flame tanks stood ready for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. The army wasn't far behind. After seeing what happened on Iwo Jima, they converted the entire 710th Tank Battalion to flamethrowers for Okinawa. During that battle, Army flame tanks burned through 200,000 gallons of fuel, smashing Japanese cave defenses in the island's south. What started as a desperate improvisation became standard kit for Pacific battles, but this was bigger than just tactics. The Japanese military, shaped by centuries of tradition, collapsed in the face of American tech. Flamethrower tanks didn't just introduce a new weapon, they marked a shift in war itself, from individual heroics to sheer industrial might. The production numbers say it all. By the end of the war, Colonel Unmar's flame tank group had built 354 flame tanks. At Schofield Barracks, the CBS crew mixed up a staggering 26,343 gallons of flamethrower fuel. Their napalm plant could churn out 1,000 gallons a day, and once that capability spread across the Pacific, the U.S. basically torched its way through Japanese defenses. But the people behind these weapons, the CBS team, barely got a nod. After the war, machinist mate Reicher and electrician's mate Kissel just melted back into civilian life, their names buried in dry technical reports. Colonel Unmar kept working on chemical weapons until he retired, his role in the victory hardly known except among a handful of military historians. Still, the brutal truth is their work saved thousands of Americans and cut short one of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific. The tank crews faced their own demons. Some fought with what doctors would later call PTSD, the sights and sounds, the screams, the smell of burning flesh, the way bodies turned to ash never left them. Sergeant Meza, for example, kept silent about his time in the war until just before he died in 1993. He finally told his grandson, "We did what we had to do. Nobody should be proud of burning men alive, but those tanks saved a lot of Marine lives. That's what I try to remember." After the war, the flame tank vets leaned on each other, building a kind of unofficial support group. Each year, they met in Hawaii, returning to Schofield Barracks, where their tanks had been born. Reporters never showed up, which was probably for the best. These gatherings gave them space to talk about horrors civilians just couldn't understand. In 2010, only 4 men made it to the last reunion. The Japanese side of the story came out slowly through interrogations and captured papers. A lot of Japanese soldiers had been taught that dying in battle would bring them spiritual glory, but the flamethrowers changed everything. The fear of burning alive broke them. Suddenly, fleeing seemed better than dying inside a bunker-turned oven. This collapse led to the first mass surrenders in Japan's military history. Lieutenant Yamada, who survived the first flame tank attack on February 20th, ended up as one of the 216 prisoners. Later, he told American intelligence, "We prepared for bullets, shells, bayonets, starvation. We didn't prepare for burning petroleum that found us in our deepest bunkers. The flame tanks broke our spirit in ways nothing else could. They turned our strongest defenses into tombs." Sergeant Masao Hayashi captured after being burned while trying to escape, described it in brutal detail. The napalm came like a flood, pouring in everywhere. Men tried to escape but ran into more fire. Some shot themselves. Others ran into American guns. Anything was better than burning. I saw hardened soldiers refuse to enter positions after seeing flame tanks. This wasn't the death we trained for. The impact of these tanks didn't end when the shooting stopped. The Marine Corps studied what happened at Iwo Jima and rewrote its assault playbook, weaving armor, infantry, and engineers together. Specialized armor for specific problems became the new standard. Future weapons would focus less on brute force and more on flexibility and innovation. The technology itself kept moving. The M4A3 Sherman flame tanks saw action in Korea, burning out Chinese bunker complexes during the battles for the Punch Bowl and Heartbreak Ridge. Marines destroyed over 300 Chinese positions with flame tanks in Korea. Though the effect wasn't as shocking, Chinese troops knew what was coming. The last American flame tank, the M132, based on the M113 APC, stuck around until 1978. That ended a line that started with 8 jury-rigged Shermans in a secret Hawaiian warehouse. By then, thermobaric weapons and precision-guided bombs had replaced flamethrowers for busting bunkers. International law eventually stepped in, with Protocol 3 of the Convention on certain conventional weapons putting rules around incendiaries. The same weapon that had helped win at Iwo Jima became controversial as people turned against anything seen as too cruel. And yet military historians point out the strange twist. For all their horror, the flamethrower tanks shortened the battle and probably saved thousands of lives that would have been lost in a conventional assault. The industrial effort behind them was immense. You can't overstate what it took to make that happen. The United States built 49,234 Sherman tanks during World War II, but only 354 ever became flamethrowers. Even then, those few flamethrower tanks left a mark way bigger than their small numbers suggest. At Iwo Jima, just 8 of them tipped the scales in a battle that might have dragged on for months, costing tens of thousands more lives. The cost? About $200,000 per converted tank back in 1945. Compared to the lives saved, that price looks tiny. Military analysts figured each flame tank at Iwo Jima saved about 625 American lives, judging by the casualty rates in battles with and without flamethrower support. It's a brutal calculation, but in war, the math is often that simple. Technology pays off in lives not lost. But numbers only tell part of the story. The real legacy of these tanks was psychological. Flamethrower Shermans showed that technology could break even the fiercest human resistance. The old days of individual heroism, of warriors standing their ground no matter what, were fading. Now, victory belonged to the side that could outbuild and out-invent the other. The samurai spirit, as noble as it was, couldn't hold up against liquid fire poured out by mass-produced machines. Under the black sand of Iwo Jima, more than 20,000 Japanese soldiers lie where they fell, defending positions they thought were unbreakable. Many died to weapons they never even imagined. Their deaths didn't just close a chapter in one battle. They closed the book on the idea that determination alone could beat overwhelming firepower and modern tech. Those 8 M4A3 flamethrower tanks were just machines, steel, aluminum, rubber, all bolted together by workers who never saw combat. Still, they stood for something bigger. The surge of American industry, science, and invention, all aimed at winning the war. The Seabees who built them, the Marines who fought in them, and the Japanese soldiers who faced them, they were all swept up in a transformation that redefined what war looked like. Today, the last surviving Iwo Jima flame tank sits in the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. Tank 434, you can still see the battle scars, welds where armor was patched, dents from shells, scratches from volcanic rock. There's a small plaque with the specs and battle history, but it can't tell you what it was really like. It can't give you the rush of compressed nitrogen or the stench of burning napalm or the sight of fire flooding into bunkers. Most visitors glance at it and move on, unsettled by what it represents. Kids ask why anyone would build something so terrible. Veterans pause. They know. For them, the tank isn't about glorifying war, but about recognizing what war demands. The last reunion of Iwo Jima flame tank crews happened in 2015, 70 years after the battle. Only 3 crew members made it, all in their 90s. They met at the museum and shared stories with historians hungry to capture their memories before they disappeared. Corporal Anthony Vitelli, who'd been a gunner on Tank 436, said it best. People ask if I'm proud of what we did. Pride isn't the right word. We did a terrible job that had to be done. Those tanks saved Marine lives. That's enough. Almost everyone involved with these machines is gone now. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams, who fought alongside the flame tanks with his own flamethrower, was the last Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima. He died in June 2022 at 98. With him went the last living piece of what flame warfare really meant. His foundation still honors Gold Star families, making sure the sacrifices aren't forgotten. Declassified reports from Colonel Unmacht, opened in the 1970s, show just how desperate the push for innovation was. The Seabees worked 20-hour days, sleeping next to their welding rigs, doing in weeks what regular military procurement would have taken years to finish. Their reward, watching their creation end a bloody battle faster than anyone thought possible. On the other side, Japanese military records finally opened in the 1980s show what it felt like to face the flame tanks. Over and over, reports describe the panic as liquid fire crept closer, making bunkers and tunnels useless. Orders to hold positions to the end fell apart when fire snaked into every hiding place. One Japanese account put it bluntly: the flame tanks negated every advantage of our defensive positions. Height meant nothing when fire could arc over obstacles. Depth meant nothing when flame flowed like water into our tunnels. Concrete and steel, no matter how tough, meant nothing against liquid fire. In late March 1945, right before he died, General Kuribayashi sent one last message. He didn't just talk about numbers or firepower. He saw what really happened. American imagination beat them. The same bunkers the Japanese built to survive shells and bombs turned into death traps once the flamethrower tanks rolled in. Kuribayashi got it. Future wars would go to those who imagine new ways to fight, not just those who perfect old tricks. He was right. What started with just 8 flame tanks at Iwo Jima didn't stop there. It set off a chain reaction: guided missiles, smart bombs, cyber warfare. Tech kept changing, but the rules stayed the same. New ideas beat old tactics. Imagination beats routine. It only took a few days for the Marines at Iwo Jima to switch from old-school assaults to teaming up with flame tanks. Nobody trained them for that. They figured it out under fire because they had to. That's what American flexibility looked like. After the war, the numbers told the story. Where flame tanks showed up, Japanese soldiers were 70% more likely to bail out before the Marines even got there. The fear was huge. Sometimes just seeing a flame tank made defenders drop everything and run, even if the tank never fired. One Marine report put it bluntly: the enemy's fear of flame tanks borders on panic. Prisoners report that soldiers refuse orders to occupy positions once flame tanks are spotted in the area. In those 36 brutal days, 8 flamethrower tanks changed history. They saved thousands of American lives, cracked open Iwo Jima, and proved a new kind of warfare worked. Their shadow stretched far. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, anywhere Americans fought enemies dug in deep. But nobody really settled the moral questions. The tank crews who made it home struggled. Killing by fire at that scale messed with their heads. It wasn't the kind of war they'd imagined. Some never talked about it. They carried those memories to their graves, not wanting to burden anyone else with what they'd seen and done. 40 years later, in 1985, there was a reconciliation ceremony on Iwo Jima. Robert Meza, a former tank commander, met Koshi Yamada, a Japanese officer who survived that first flame tank attack. They stood where it all happened. Yamada spoke through an interpreter. I hated you for 40 years. The flame tanks killed my friends in ways I can't forget. But I understand now. War makes monsters of us all. You did what you had to do, and so did we. Meza answered, we were all just boys trying to survive. I'm glad we both lived to stand here today. The two men hugged. As the sun went down over Iwo Jima's black sand, the old soldiers walked together toward the memorial, Mount Suribachi rising behind them. The island was quiet again. The age of the flamethrower tank started and ended in the Pacific. Its mark is burned into military history. 8 modified Shermans rewrote the rules. Victory went to those who could match industrial muscle with new ideas on the battlefield. The flames are gone, but their impact still burns bright. In the end, Iwo Jima wasn't won by bravery alone, though there was plenty on both sides. It was American industry and quick thinking under fire that tipped the scales. Flamethrower tanks brought together technology, tactics, and pure grit, shaping how America would fight for decades. They were weapons for a brutal time, necessary evils in a war that left no room for half measures. The Japanese defenders fought with unbelievable courage. They'd built the toughest fortress in the Pacific, a warren of tunnels and bunkers nothing short of fire could crack. But they never saw the flamethrowers coming, liquid fire pouring into caves, turning their refuge into an inferno. Their defeat wasn't about a lack of courage. It was about running into a wall of innovation and raw power. In the end, the numbers told the truth. No sentiment, just the facts. 8 flamethrower tanks rolled ashore. They burned through 360,000 gallons of fuel mix. Together, they destroyed more than 1,000 fortified enemy positions. Thanks to them, about 5,000 American lives were saved, while over 6,000 Japanese soldiers died in the flames. The fighting dragged on for 36 days, but without those tanks, it could have lasted months. This is how modern war works. Technology tips the scales. Sometimes it's that simple. Iwo, that volcanic island, now goes by Iwoto again and belongs to Japan. You wouldn't know a brutal battle happened there. Nature covered up the scars, filling craters with green, hiding trenches under volcanic earth. But underground, it's different. Sealed caves and collapsed tunnels still hold the remains of men who died by fire. Fewer people remember their sacrifice every year. General Holland Smith, who led the 5th Amphibious Corps at Iwo Jima, said it best: the flamethrower tanks were the difference between victory and catastrophe. Without them, we would have paid an unbearable price for every yard of that cursed island. They were horrible weapons, but war is horrible business. In the end, they saved more lives than any other weapon we employed. The flames that once raged across Iwo are long gone. Most of the men who fought there are gone too. But what they did, how they changed the way wars are fought, still matters. Those 8 modified Shermans broke the deadlock at the Pacific's toughest fortress. Warfare shifted just like that, from men fighting up close to technology, deciding who wins. The battle ended. The war soon followed. Still, the memory lingers, the hiss of compressed nitrogen, the rush of liquid fire into bunkers, the screams swallowed by heat. That moment on a volcanic island marked the end of the old way of war and the start of something new. The age of the warrior ended in fire. The age of machines had arrived.